Are you stuck in tutorial hell? No matter how many videos you watch or guides you read, you just can't seem to get the hang of Unity? Don't worry, you're not alone, and I'm here to try to help you. Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben, and I want to share with you 5 tips that will hopefully alter your way of thinking and help you break free from the endless cycle of tutorials. Starting off with tip number 1, you're learning even when you think you're not. Have you ever finished a tutorial and thought, awesome, now let me take what I learned and make my own super sick game, only to open a fresh Unity project and stare at the screen not even knowing where to start? This is bullshit! You might just be thinking too broadly and need to narrow your sights and break things down into smaller sections you can understand at your current level. For example, you're really struggling with setting up a player controller. Thankfully, as long as you're using Unity, they have a marketplace that's full of assets that can save you time. There's no shame in doing it. It's just, there's really smart people and they post these great assets on there. Why not use them? And then you can maybe build off of it and tweak it to your needs. Or if you don't want to go through the marketplace, you can make one from a tutorial, and it'll take a lot of the complexity out of the equation and allow you to learn by expanding on it. You can create a simple door that opens when you approach it by breaking it down step by step. For example, so for a door, we can break it down into maybe 6 steps, with 1 being you put the door in your scene. 2, how can we detect the players within the range of the door to open it? 3, what button does the player need to press to open the door? 4, how do we get the player's input from their keyboard? 5, how do we get the player script to interact with the door script? And lastly, how do we make the doors swing open or slide out of the way if it's a sliding door? Breaking these problems into small achievable steps really takes a lot of the daunting feelings out of the way, and figuring out a lot of the subtle nuances of C# and Unity's functions will be just a quick Google search away, or even if you just go to the documentation page. I know it's a little scary if you've never used it before, but a lot of the information in there is exactly what you need. Tip number 2, you're focusing on all the wrong things. You don't know what you don't know, and it's really as simple as that. No one was born knowing how to code or set up an animation graph. You wouldn't even know it existed unless you've seen it or used it before. And everyone that knows how to use them learned through a lot of trial and error, and there will be an overwhelming amount of errors, but that's really the secret sauce to actually learning. As painful and as grueling as it feels, that's just how we're wired as humans. So don't get caught up in what you don't know, and just start by looking up what you need to know at that exact moment. So say, for example, you want to add footsteps to your game. So look up a video or go on the documentation and try to figure out how you can add those footsteps. It doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be efficient, it doesn't have to be the absolute best way to implement it. It just has to work. That's literally it. It just has to work. Even if it's working terribly, at least it's working. You learn something. The optimization will come, and that comes with experience, and you're not going to get experience if you're trying to get the absolute best system going, because there's just a huge rabbit hole you're going to go down, and you're never going to achieve what you're looking for, and then you'll just get stuck in that vicious cycle all over again. Tip number 3, small victories lead to success. Small games may not seem like they're worth your time, but they're actually a cheat code. Even if you don't publish the game or have anyone play it, it's worth doing for the experience alone. Start with really small things. So take a mechanic from any game you're trying to make and try to make it. Even if you follow a tutorial, try to customize it. You will learn the absolute most when you try to customize it. If you just follow a tutorial, you're going to get exactly what that tutorial is kind of explaining, and you're not going to learn anything from it because essentially you're just copy and pasting the code. So even if you just play around with the variables, changing the speed, changing the jump height, changing how the camera moves, the sensitivity, little things like that will all add up. It'll wire things in your brain even when you don't know that it's doing that. And if you really want the secret sauce from that, try to add a feature. Say that when you jump in that character controller, you freeze and you can't move around while you're jumping. Try to implement that and manipulate the code and change it so when you're jumping and you're in the air, you can actually move around. Because the only way you're actually going to learn and hold on to that information is when you actually go and do and try to do your own thing and force your brain to think pragmatically. Tip number 4: you are not alone. You could join Discords, Facebook groups, forums. You can even go on YouTube comment sections, and there's all kinds of people in there, and I know you've all seen them because you've probably watched hundreds of tutorials, and I know you've ran into a problem and you ran to the comment section and you're trying to look for a solution from somebody, and you see all those comments, people that are just super frustrated and talking in half thought out English and are explaining their problem terribly. Try to help them. By putting yourself in that role as the teacher, you kind of change the way you're thinking, and really it's kind of a selfish act because you're forcing yourself to actually apply what you've learned and be able to formulate it into a perspective that someone else can actually take and learn from. And it really just reinforces everything you've learned and helps really sink in and let it solidify in your brain. And by helping them, you're also helping yourself, which is just great. And that's really how a community should be, is just people helping each other by helping each other. But maybe you just want to do your own thing. Communities aren't your thing. You're just in your own little world. I get that. You can get an old school programming trick and get a rubber duck. And it's literally just a rubber duck that you'd have in the bath with you as a kid, maybe. And it's really just there as a person to talk to and work your problems through. Try to explain to the duck. It may seem ridiculous, but try to explain to him the problem, talk through it, and maybe through that process of trying to explain to the duck what you're trying to achieve and what you're doing and what your problem is, you just might have an epiphany and figure out the problem by talking to it. And nowadays, the rubber duck might be obsolete because we have ChatGPT, which is really a really great resource for helping you talk through what you're trying to achieve. You can even just put in your code and paste it in there and say, hey, why isn't this working? What can I do to improve it? And it might take it a second, but it'll spit out a whole lot of information that you can actually take and learn from. And maybe it'll tell you, hey, you made a spelling error here, or you're using this function incorrectly, or you need to use this instead of that. And it's really just a great resource. And even if you don't want to paste your code into it, you could just say, hey, I'm having a problem. Maybe this raycast isn't detecting the floor. What are some reasons why? And it'll kind of help you figure out where you need to put debug lines in your code and work through that problem with it. And if one solution doesn't work, say, hey, this didn't work. It's detecting the floor, but it's still not doing what I need it to do. And it'll just go through, and every time you say this didn't work, it'll come up with a different solution. And you try that doesn't work. Try another solution. If that doesn't work, try another solution, and then it might just work. And another thing you can do is just talk with your buddies, talk with your friends, people you play games with, see if they're interested in making games, and maybe you guys can team up and learn together. Last, and definitely not least, tip number 5, which is don't limit yourself. Everyone says don't make your dream game right away, and I always hated that. And don't let that stop you from trying, because you'll learn a lot of things from that. You'll especially learn how much you don't know, and that's actually a good thing. It'll let you know what you need to focus on learning the absolute most. So watch as many tutorials as you want and follow them as far as you can. And when you can't do any more and you hit a wall, just move on to something else. But before you do, start that dream game over again and try going at it from a different approach, and maybe you'll see what you learned from the videos. And the last point I want to make is just don't get stuck in the mindset of I need to learn this or I'll never be able to make a game. The internet is forever, and the task of keeping all that information in your tiny little head is an impossible one. Everything you need to know has already been asked before. The hardest part might just be finding that specific answer to your very specific question. So if we go back to that example of trying to add a door that you can open with your character controller, maybe you don't know how to detect when the player is close to the door. Maybe you can search for how to detect when a player is close to an object, and you might just find something about attaching a box collider to the door, and if you set it to trigger, you can then call on trigger enter in your script which will actually return what entered that trigger at that exact moment, which ideally would be your player, which then in turn you can get a reference to when they press a key, and then you can keep just stepping further and further down that line, and eventually you'll just end up with a door that actually opens. I hope these tips help you break free from tutorial hell. Remember, game development is a journey, and every step, no matter how small, is progress. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. I plan on doing more Unity tips and tutorials, and happy developing. Okay, bye!